Good evening, and once again, the world is learning just how easy it is to get under the skin of the most powerful man on earth. Today, after storming out of a meeting on infrastructure, what could have been a hugely popular issue for him, President Trump stepped outside and unloaded on live television. And no, that's not really normal, not even by the dim lights of these not normal times. If you didn't see it when it happened, you'll want to watch it now. And remember, to make it happen, all Nancy Pelosi had to do was say what she and others have been saying repeatedly for months.
We believe that no one is above the law, including the President of the United States, and we believe that the President of the United States is engaged in a cover-up, and that was the nature of the meeting.
Well, that was at 10 a.m. Eastern time this morning. From there, she headed to the White House for an 11:15 meeting with the president on infrastructure spending, something nearly every lawmaker likes, though some obviously differ on how to pay for it. The president showed up 15 minutes late, then complained for several minutes about what Speaker Pelosi said.
Evening, everyone. Let's talk about how easy it seems to rattle the most powerful guy in the world. Today, after storming out of an infrastructure meeting, something that could have really boosted his image, President Trump stepped outside and just let loose on live television. And honestly, that's not exactly a usual thing to see, not even in these times that are anything but ordinary. If you missed it, you're definitely going to want to check it out. All it took was Nancy Pelosi making a simple statement that she's been repeating for months. Nobody is above the law, including the president, and that he's involved in a cover-up. That was the scene earlier at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. After that, she made her way to the White House for an 11:15 meeting with the president about infrastructure spending, a topic nearly every lawmaker supports. Though opinions on funding, it can differ quite a bit. The president showed up 15 minutes late and spent quite a while grumbling about what Pelosi had said. Now, I've come across some videos that are going viral, featuring what people are calling brutal courtroom moments. In these clips, a judge goes through Trump's statements methodically, dismantling each lie piece by piece and leaving everyone in the courtroom in stunned silence. It's pretty wild seeing a judge call out Trump's dishonesty in real time like that, and it definitely has a powerful impact. But let's remember, while it seems dramatic, we've got to distinguish between what's actually happening in court and what's been exaggerated for clicks and views. There's a lot of truth to what's being shown, but the way it's presented can blur some crucial lines. And look, before diving deeper, before President Trump bulldozed a third of the White House last week, he had already paved over one of its most beautiful and iconic places, the White House Rose Garden. This summer, President Trump poured concrete over the Rose Garden at the White House in order to create this, what he calls the Rose Garden Club. It's basically a fast food restaurant patio with garish yellow umbrellas he had shipped up from his house in Florida to make it look like the assistant manager hasn't arrived yet to really set the place up. Look at that. That used to be the Rose Garden. Destroying the White House Rose Garden, literally paving it, cost nearly $2 million.
Before President Trump bulldozed a third of the White House last week, he had already paved over one of its most beautiful and iconic places, the White House Rose Garden. This summer, President Trump poured concrete over the Rose Garden at the White House in order to create this, what he calls the Rose Garden Club. It's basically a fast food restaurant patio with garish yellow umbrellas he had shipped up from his house in Florida to make it look like the assistant manager hasn't arrived yet to really set the place up. Look at that. That used to be the Rose Garden. Destroying the White House Rose Garden, literally paving it, cost nearly $2 million.
But let's switch gears and dive into the courtroom drama surrounding Trump. In fact, judges have publicly called out his false statements right there in court. It's all documented in court transcripts. They've corrected his misstatements, thrown out his legal arguments, and used pretty strong language to describe his claims, referring to them as incendiary untruths that are completely disconnected from reality. Judge Juan Marchon really took a stand during Trump's New York hush money case, as he had to repeatedly correct Trump's public remarks about the trial. Trump was out there telling everyone that the gag order meant he couldn't testify. He spun it like he wanted to take the stand, but the judge wouldn't let him. But that was just plain wrong. Judge Merchan stepped in and told Trump right there in court that he absolutely had the right to testify. The gag order only covered attacks on witnesses, jurors, and court staff. Trump was misrepresenting what the order actually said, and it's all in the court records. So yes, a judge did take down one of Trump's lies by directly correcting him. Merchant also held Trump in contempt multiple times for not respecting the gag order. In those contempt rulings, the judge described Trump's social media posts as incendiary untruths. He found that Trump's statements about witnesses and court staff weren't just false. They were dangerous and didn't qualify as protected political speech. They were outright attacks that broke court orders. Once again, a judge made it crystal clear that Trump's statements were untrue, put it in writing, and made it part of the official record. It's hard to wrap my head around just how much harsh language federal judges have directed at the Trump administration's arguments. I mean, one judge flat out stated that their claims regarding emergency powers had no real connection to reality. When a judge uses words like that, it's basically a polite way of saying you're not just wrong. You're completely making things up. Other judges haven't held back either. They've accused the Trump administration's lawyers of misleading the courts with false representations and outright ignoring judicial commands. The credibility problems surrounding Trump and his team have been highlighted by multiple federal judges over various cases. CNN and others have been tracking this trend, and it's quite extraordinary that judges across civil fraud, criminal prosecutions, and immigration cases have pointed out misleading statements made by Trump and his lawyers. It's not typical for judges to employ such intense language, and when they do, it shows they've really lost their patience with dishonesty. So when we talk about judges dismantling Trump's lies, it's based on solid ground. They've actually caught him in falsehoods and corrected him publicly using strong language to describe his dishonesty. And all of this is backed by facts. But here's where it gets interesting. When these moments get turned into viral videos, there's a tendency to dramatize them quite a bit. They tend to condense real instances into something that feels more theatrical than what really went down. Instead of showcasing just one brutal courtroom scene where a single judge methodically tears apart Trump's claims, the reality is much different. Across various cases and over time, different judges have pointed out a range of false statements. It's more of a pattern rather than one dramatic moment. The pump politics videos, while grounded in actual judicial findings, really amplify and dramatize these events, making it seem like there's one massive takedown. They take a series of corrections and reprimands from various judges and present them as if they were part of one sweeping, devastating moment in court, using flashy narration and phrases like brutal courtroom moment to create a sense of relentless exposure. It's interesting how some content out there presents itself as purely fictional or dramatized, while others tend to take more of a real courtroom moment and add a dramatic twist, making actual judicial corrections seem like mini theatrical events. It's key to understand this difference. Sure, judges have definitely called Trump out for his lies, and that's a big deal. However, there hasn't been that one dramatic hearing where a judge methodically listed Trump's falsehoods and dismantled them one by one as everyone sat in stunned silence. The truth of the matter is more subtle. Over time, multiple judges have dealt with various cases, building a record demonstrating that Trump has made false statements, and that record carries a lot of weight. Each time a judge officially finds that Trump lied or made misleading claims, it becomes useful evidence for future cases, creating a clear pattern. This really works against Trump when he tries to claim he's being unfairly persecuted, especially since judges consistently find he's not being truthful. It gives prosecutors solid ground to argue that Trump can't be trusted. So the real narrative isn't about that one intense courtroom moment. It's about the collection of judicial findings proving that Trump lies, a pattern emerging across multiple cases where judges grow weary of his dishonesty and the erosion of credibility that weakens all his legal defenses. Now let's take a closer look at specific instances where judges have called out Trump's false statements and delve into what this pattern signifies. A prime example is the gag order correction in the hush money case, which is one of the clearest instances of a judge directly contradicting Trump's public claims. Trump was under a gag order that prevented him from publicly attacking witnesses, jurors, prosecutors, family members, and court staff. Judge Merchant put this order in place to protect those involved in the trial from any intimidation or harassment, which is standard practice for high-profile cases. Despite this, Trump continued to assert publicly that the gag order was preventing him from testifying. He made these claims right outside the courthouse to reporters and even posted about it on social media, telling his supporters he wanted to defend himself on the stand, but was being blocked by the unfair gag order. This was simply not true. The gag order had no bearing on his right to testify. It only restricted him from making public statements about certain individuals involved in the case. He retained the same right as any defendant to take the stand and share his version of events under oath. During a court session with Trump in attendance, the judge directly addressed some false claims he was making about a gag order. The judge made it clear that Trump had the full right to testify and that nothing in the gag order stopped him from doing so. It was really something to watch the judge correct Trump repeatedly because he kept insisting on this misleading narrative. This was a major moment because it showed that Trump wasn't just confused. He was intentionally misrepresenting the court order to paint himself as a victim of censorship, and the judge wasn't having any of it. Now, it's worth mentioning that legal experts found this type of public correction quite unusual. Typically, judges don't confront defendants over their public statements, but Judge Merchant felt it was necessary because Trump's lies were so blatant and damaging to how people understood the trial. Moving on to the contempt findings, Trump found himself held in contempt at least 10 times for breaching the gag order. Each time he was making public comments that attacked witnesses or court personnel in ways that the order explicitly prohibited. In those contempt rulings, the judge described Trump's remarks as incendiary untruths, meaning they were not just inflammatory but also false. This is pretty significant because it's not merely the judge's opinion. These are formal findings entered into the legal record. Trump's statements about Michael Cohen court staff and the jury pool were identified as false attacks, which means they weren't just part of political speech. Each contempt ruling came with a fine, and the judge warned that any further violations could lead to jail time. Importantly, the judge made it clear that Trump wouldn't be excused from these penalties just because of his status as a former or future president. The court could indeed jail him if necessary to uphold its orders. So, we now have multiple formal findings confirming that Trump made these false incendiary statements. These aren't just accusations, but judicial determinations backed by evidence. They're officially part of Trump's legal history. Looking at similar situations, Judge Arthur Engoron in the New York civil fraud case reached comparable conclusions, finding that financial statements from Trump's organization were fraudulent. I recently came across an interesting detail about a ruling where a judge systematically tackled a series of lies. It's not just casual accusations. The judge went through specific claims about property values, square footage, and asset valuations, determining these statements were materially false. The judge's findings were all laid out in a written decision, firmly establishing the inaccuracies with evidence and legal reasoning. This methodical approach really highlighted how the judge was dismantling the lies one by one. Now, when it comes to immigration cases, federal judges have been even tougher on arguments from the Trump administration. For instance, one judge pointed out that the administration's claims regarding emergency authority were completely disconnected from reality. Another judge called out officials for misleading the court about following orders. Reports showed a trend where multiple federal judges voiced their skepticism about the credibility of the Trump Justice Department. They openly expressed doubts about whether they could trust the statements made by its lawyers, noting that many were false or misleading. This situation is pretty extraordinary because federal judges typically assume that government lawyers are honest and act in good faith. But the Trump administration seemed to have eroded that trust to the point where judges began questioning everything they were told. A former federal judge explained just how significant this loss of credibility is. When judges don't trust you, it complicates everything. Arguments face more scrutiny, and there's a greater need for proof to back up any claims. Requests for leniency are more likely to be denied. The challenge grows over time. Each judge who identifies false statements makes the next judge even more doubtful. Contempt findings lead to future courts hesitating to give Trump the benefit of the doubt, and every harsh ruling about disconnected arguments weakens Trump's legal stance. This whole scenario represents a pattern of brutal moments in the courtroom, a cumulative record of Trump's dishonesty, judges catching and correcting him, formally declaring his statements false, imposing sanctions, and spelling out consequences if these behaviors persist. Even news organizations have stepped in to fact-check misleading claims from Trump and his allies. You know, it's honestly hard to believe just how many times judges have called out Trump for dishonesty. There's this real pattern of him lying, and it gets even wilder when he twists what judges actually said. They end up having to correct him, which just piles on more evidence of his dishonesty. Now let's dive into those pump videos that showcase all this. They grab these scattered moments where judges are correcting Trump on things like gag orders and contempt, highlighting his incendiary untruths and labeling his arguments as completely untethered from reality. And then they weave those into dramatic narratives. In these videos, you see scenes from the courtroom where a judge calmly walks through Trump's claims. Lie number 1, false. Here's the evidence. Lie number 2, also false. Here's why. It builds this powerful sense of a systematic dismantling of his claims happening live with everyone in the courtroom left speechless. But here's the thing. While the underlying facts are spot on, judges have indeed found Trump's statements to be false. The way these events are presented feels a lot more dramatic than the actual court proceedings. In reality, those contempt orders are pretty dry legal documents, and the judge's corrections are couched in technical jargon during rather routine proceedings. The videos amp up the drama, using words like brutal and destroys, portraying lawyers in a frenzy and the courtroom in dead silence, adding an emotional weight that court transcripts don't convey. Some of the analysis is genuinely helpful, taking those dry legal findings and breaking them down in a way that's engaging. It's important to help folks understand that judges have formally found Trump to be dishonest. That's a big deal. But then when the dramatization goes overboard, creating the impression of a single earth-shattering confrontation rather than an ongoing series of events, it can mislead people. They might look for that one explosive hearing where everything changed, and when they don't find it, they could mistakenly think the whole narrative is a fabrication. The truth is, even though there's this dry legal language in courtroom rituals, judges have continuously called him out, sometimes using pretty harsh language. The findings carry weight, but they happen within the usual grind of court operations, not in a single dramatic moment fit for TV. This distinction helps put things in perspective. The collection of judicial findings about Trump's lies is significant. It weakens his legal standing and arms his political opponents. But it's not just one big moment that turned the tides. It's like death by 1,000 cuts, each judicial finding of dishonesty adding up to a serious collection of issues. While none of those moments might seem individually catastrophic, the overall impact is pretty devastating. Let's take a closer look at what it means when judges repeatedly call out Trump's lies and why getting this right is crucial. First off, credibility is key in legal situations, and Trump is losing his in a big way. When you find yourself on the stand or involved in a case, the judges and juries are the ones who decide if they can trust you. And that decision often determines how things turn out. Trump is building a documented history that shows he lies. For example, Judge Merchant described his statements as incendiary untruths, while Judge Ingraman found his financial documents to be fraudulent. Federal judges have pointed out that his arguments often lack any grounding in reality. Each of these findings chips away at his credibility, which is going to have consequences for future cases. So when Trump insists he had no clue about the classified documents, prosecutors can just pull up that past evidence highlighting his dishonesty. If he claims he acted in good faith, courts can refer back to other cases where he was found to be acting dishonestly. This history sticks with him. It's not just Trump who suffers from this. His lawyers and administration officials are getting caught in the fallout too. When judges say that the Department of Justice under Trump struggles with credibility, it impacts every single case they take on. If courts can't trust government lawyers, the whole administration's legal efficacy takes a hit. This collapse of credibility has real-world effects. Cases Trump should be able to win are suddenly a lot tougher, and arguments that might have worked previously are dismissed because judges are now more skeptical. Chances for any favorable treatment vanish as judges are simply not putting their trust in him. Secondly, this trend reveals a pattern of intentional dishonesty rather than just innocent mistakes. Sure, we all slip up. Defendants can misunderstand legal jargon, and lawyers might misrepresent facts by accident. That's just human nature. But Trump's misleading statements show a clear, deliberate pattern. He claimed that a gag order was blocking testimony when it clearly wasn't. He kept violating court orders even after being warned and fined. He made explosive claims that judges ruled were outright lies aimed at undermining witnesses. This isn't just confusion. This is knowing dishonesty. Judges are well aware of that distinction, and it's important. When Judge Merchant had to correct Trump multiple times about the same incorrect claim regarding the gag order, it was clear that this wasn't just a little slip-up. It's honestly hard to believe how Trump continues to lie even when he knows the truth. This choice to be dishonest really damages his credibility in a way that mistakes simply don't. Sure, everyone makes errors sometimes, and those can usually be forgiven. But when you deliberately decide to lie, you destroy trust forever. Judges are keeping track of this pattern of deceit. They're not just saying he occasionally gets things wrong. Now, let's talk about the overall picture. It's not just one dramatic courtroom moment that has led to Trump losing credibility. It's dozens of smaller incidents that add up. Each instance where he's found in contempt, every correction of his false public statements, the harsh rulings about his unrealistic arguments, the consistent accusations of misleading courts, and the formal declarations of fraud, they all contribute to the same outcome. And this accumulation is the real deal. While no single event may seem catastrophic on its own, when you have 10, 20, or 30 judges pointing out dishonesty, it creates a pattern that's hard to ignore. This pattern makes it impossible for him to claim that he's being persecuted, especially when different judges in various cases keep finding that he lied. Focusing on just one moment can be misleading because someone might brush it off as bias or a simple mistake, but they can't easily dismiss a recurring theme across all these judges, jurisdictions, and cases that span several years. That pattern is where the real power lies. Plus, these judicial findings serve as solid ammunition for both prosecution and political opponents. Each time a judge officially states that Trump has made false claims, it becomes evidence that prosecutors can use to build their case. This history of dishonesty makes it more likely that juries will believe he lied in ongoing cases as well. Democrats are certainly going to take advantage of these judicial remarks in their messaging. They'll point to judges labeling Trump's statements as complete untruths and reference the courts that have found fraud. They can use the credibility issues even conservative judges have acknowledged as campaign talking points. And it's tough for Trump to counter these arguments because they're based on judicial findings, not just partisan attacks. For example, when Judge Merchant calls Trump's statements incendiary untruths, that's a definitive legal conclusion, not just a political viewpoint. Similarly, when Judge Engoron identifies fraud after a trial backed by evidence, that's not merely campaign chatter. This is precisely why Trump aggressively targets judges in the court system. He knows how damaging these findings can be for him. He attempts to undermine them by alleging bias or political persecution. Yet the sheer number of judges across the political spectrum making similar conclusions is difficult for him to shake off. Let's talk about how the media plays a huge role in shaping what we understand about the courtroom, especially when it comes to complicated legal cases. The way viral videos capture those intense courtroom moments can really help or hurt how we see what's happening. On one hand, these dramatic clips turn those dry, dense court transcripts into something that's actually interesting and understandable for most people. Let's face it, not many of us dive into legal documents, so a little dramatization can make it easier to grasp the important stuff. But here's the catch. Sometimes these dramatizations go overboard. They can twist the truth by mixing up different cases or by implying that something dramatic happened when it really didn't. When the media presents this kind of content without clear labels, things can get confusing. If a clip dramatizes an event, it should be upfront about that. And if it's combining multiple cases into one, that needs to be explained too. Otherwise, even well-meaning content can give people the wrong idea, leading them to form beliefs that don't match reality. Now let's pivot and talk about Trump's reaction to all of this. It's pretty revealing. He sidesteps engaging with the actual substance of the judicial findings. There's no admission of mistakes, no corrections to false statements, and he doesn't even follow court orders. Instead, he resorts to name-calling, claiming the judges are corrupt or biased, and framing any sanctions against him as some kind of unfair treatment. When he distorts what judges have said and then complains when they correct him, it only escalates the situation. This behavior invites more contempt findings and harsher language from the judges, further painting a picture of dishonesty that's hard to ignore. If he genuinely believed he was making mistakes, you'd think he would just correct them when they were pointed out. Instead, he digs in his heels and lashes out at the judges for calling him out, which really suggests he knows he's not being truthful and just doesn't care. Judges pick up on this, and it definitely colors their perception of everything he says and does. The constant stream of dishonest statements, combined with attacks on anyone who tries to highlight them, builds a strong case against him in the courts. Finally, it's crucial to recognize this overall pattern to keep our expectations realistic when it comes to accountability. If you're thinking there was just one instance where a judge laid bare all of Trump's lies, you might be hoping for some quick dramatic fallout. But understanding the broader context gives us a clearer picture of what's really happening. It's important to recognize that the judicial process can be a slow burn. When things don't happen right away, it's frustrating. But understanding this pattern helps maintain a realistic perspective. Each judicial finding builds upon the last, creating a detailed record that can have a real impact over time. Real accountability through courts isn't swift. It takes multiple steps and proceedings to get to the core of the matter.